morning. What an appropriate song for Eastertide. We want to see Jesus. Have you ever felt like something was too good to be true? Maybe it brings to mind a child's dreams of what Santa will bring brought down to reality on Christmas morning. Maybe it's a beautiful day that turns into a damaging storm. Maybe it's a cancer remission or a sobriety that turns into a relapse. Maybe it's a wedding day whose hope and joy is not fulfilled in the day-to-day life of a struggling marriage. Whatever the example that comes to mind, we all know, on some level, the crushing disappointment of a moment when this sort of reality comes crashing into our lives. And so, as we're looking at the post-resurrection appearances of Jesus this Eastertide, we understand Thomas's reaction in John 20, when he refuses to believe that Jesus could possibly be alive. We understand him wanting to avoid yet another heart-crushing disappointment. We understand his hesitance to believe that the now living again Jesus has brought about a new reality. But Jesus meets him there, in his doubt, in his hesitation, in his protection of his own heart. And Jesus offers him a new reality, perhaps one we can think of as a capital R reality. This reality is a stronger one than the reality of Roman power and Pharisees' jealousy on Good Friday. It's a reality of new life on Easter, and it changes the disciples' lives and our world forever. I invite you to look with me at John 20, starting in verse 19. On the evening of the first day of the week, when the disciples were together, with the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and side. The disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. Again Jesus said, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you." And with that, he breathed on them and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive anyone's sins, their sins are forgiven. If you do not forgive them, they're not forgiven." Now Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. The word of the Lord. Jesus comes to the disciples in their closed upper room, in their fear and grief. And he greets them with the typical Hebrew greeting, "Peace be with you." However, as he says it twice, it's hard not to hear also that he's offering peace to their sorrow, peace to their disappointment. it's easy to hear that he's also offering full shalom, God's blessing and wholeness, God's salvation, that Jesus himself has made possible through his recent sacrifice on the cross. He's offering a new, capital R, reality to replace the disappointing, heartbreaking, lowercase r, reality that they've been living with for the past 3 days. Do you have a situation where you need God's peace? Maybe you need his reconciliation for a broken relationship. Maybe you need wholeness for your broken body. Maybe you need his offer of blessing and light and hope when all feels dark and impossible. Can you hear Jesus say, "Peace, peace be with you"? Jesus' next action is interesting. He shows the disciples his wounds. It's when they see them that they respond with joy and recognition. Why his hands and side? Why does his resurrection body still bear these marks of his suffering? It reminds me of a college lecturer I heard who insisted that the Hebrew good, that God made creation good and so on, trumped the Greek idea of perfect every time. And here's Jesus in his resurrection body still with these marks. Do they recognize him by his wounds because they just saw him receive them? Or is it that these marks represent his love for them that took him to the cross? Or do they, in their own brokenness of recent betrayals, doubts, and disappointment, identify with this wounded healer, as Henry Nouwen calls him? One commentator notes, it's in the crucifixion that God himself is made known, for he is love, and love is the laying down of one's life. After their response, Jesus again proclaims peace, and this time he commissions them. Several times in John's Gospel, the author mentions how Jesus had been sent from the Father. One commentator said that it's even more than 40 times. But now here, risen from the grave and victorious over the worst that the world can throw at him, Jesus sends his disciples. In sending Jesus, God was confronting the world with himself. Just so, in sending his disciples, Jesus, the Son of God, confronts the world by his presence in us. This means we need to be as obedient to and dependent upon the Father as Jesus himself was. After promising his sending, Jesus does something else unexpected. He breathes on them. I found these images of what this might be imagined like. Does this bring back memories of Aslan breathing hope and strength into the characters in Narnia for anyone else? But the Greek word used here has an even older background. In the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, available in Jesus' time, in Genesis 2, this same word is used for God breathing into man the breath of life. Commentators differ on whether this breathing on the disciples is the same event as what Acts 2 describes at Pentecost with the giving of the Spirit. The word there used for the Spirit can also be used of breath or even wind. But this word, emphasao, is only used here in the New Testament. Given the link to Genesis 2, it implies a new creation, a new beginning of life, a new opportunity to bear God's image into the world. It's precisely this carrying of God's image into the world that helps us make sense of the next bit about forgiveness. To be clear, we announce forgiveness, we do not create it. The sense instead is that through the disciples' witness to Jesus in word and deed, the world will be forced to choose for or against Jesus, just as they were during Jesus' own ministry. And now we come to Thomas. He refuses to believe that Jesus has risen unless he touches the nail marks in his hands and the wound in his side. Maybe it's self-preservation, as I've imagined it. Maybe it's just plain old doubt or stubbornness. Maybe he felt left out, that he wasn't there the first week. Whatever the reason, Jesus comes to him in a visit echoing the first one with the disciples a week earlier on Easter. He offers the same, "Peace be with you." But clearly, Jesus knows the stipulations that Thomas has laid down, his requirements for believing. And he doesn't berate him for his doubt and his hesitation. He doesn't shame him for not jumping for joy at the first news of the resurrection. He just meets him there with an invitation to touch his wounds. Again, it is Jesus' wounds that mark him and lead the way to belief and acceptance. Thomas's touch leads to another invitation. Stop becoming an unbeliever and become a believer. It's another way of translating it. Do you need to hear this today? Do you have some struggle that you think you must overcome before Jesus will even let you near him? Do you feel you have to have your doubts resolved before he'll appear to you? Jesus meets Thomas where he is. Can you let him in to meet you where you are? Can you hear his invitation to believe and follow? For Thomas, this encounter with the wounded and resurrected Jesus is clearly powerful and transformative. From doubting and vacillating beforehand, Thomas proclaims Jesus' identity clearly with not one, but two divine titles, my Lord and my God. Jesus recognizes his new increased faith, but blesses those who have not seen and yet have believed. That's us, folks. We haven't seen Jesus' resurrected body with its wounds in person, and yet we're called to move past Thomas's hesitation to faith. We're called to take hold of this new capital R reality where life himself is stronger than even death, and what looks like defeat can be the very beginning of victory. It's a reality where we don't have to act in self-preservation because we know that this life is not the end. It's a reality where we're invited to believe without seeing. It reminds me of a children's story I read many years ago. In it, a boy named Hero is removed from a dark and cruel world under an evil enchanter and taken to a place called Great Park by a loving king. The children in Great Park have a special game of Sight the King. All day long, the king shows up in different disguises, and the children have to try to recognize him. When they do, they spend the rest of the day playing with the king. Hero struggles to believe in the king after his experiences under the enchanter. The enchanter always taught, seeing is believing. He doesn't recognize the king, even when other children point him out, or when the king takes his own little brother and helps him to talk again, and grows grapes as big as plums to bring him joy. An older couple who care for the children of Great Park explained to Hero that the truth is he has to believe in order to see. And I'll read you the end of the story. That evening, after everyone in Caretaker's cottage was quiet, the caretaker took Hero to Outcast Village. Caretaker explained that on sighting day, many outcasts were unable to play the game of hunting the king. Instead, the king came to them. Unfortunately, Hero was too far away to see the king. There were too many people crowded around. But the boy felt strangely peaceful. Then, someone began to walk among the people. Hero could see a form moving closer to him, stopping and talking to each outcast. He hoped it was the king. Hero peered into the night. It was only a beggar. The man was wearing a brown cloak and hood. "Hero?" the beggar asked. "Hero, don't you know me?" Hero wanted to say, "You're nothing but a beggar." But something in the man's voice stopped him. "You must see me with your brother's eyes," the beggar said. "You must see me as he sees me." The beggar took off his hood and cloak. Hero tried to see him with his brother's eyes, his brother who had sighted the king. And then, why, it was the peasant who had come into the cottage that morning and carried his brother off. "Hero," said the peasant, "can you do this?" He sprang onto his hands and balanced his feet in the air as he moved across the grass. But the peasant now wore the face of a young man. Hero began to laugh. "You're the young man." Suddenly, it all came together. Hero understood. This was the king, this beggar, this peasant, this athletic young man. Here was the one who had made his brother laugh and had helped him speak. This was the one who had poured joy into Hero's heart and taught him that games were fun. The king sat on the grass beside Hero. The sovereign was laughing. So was Caretaker. "This is the king," said the old man. "I know," said Hero. He faced the men. He said, "I see the king." And he did. And so the boy discovered that Seek the King is a wonderful game. Like all games, it must be played with a child's heart, which believes and is always prepared to be surprised, because a king can wear many disguises. We live long after Jesus' death and resurrection in real time. But with eyes of faith, we can join the disciples and Thomas and still see the King, if we believe. After all, I think it's significant that even so many of Jesus' disciples didn't recognize him right away in his appearances. It takes faith to see. Believing is seeing. We can learn to recognize the signs of the kingdom Jesus is building. The new uppercase R reality. We can draw strength from the witness of others, both the actual eyewitnesses of the risen Jesus and the lives since transformed by his power. We can also take part in extending the kingdom, the reign of Jesus, ourselves, as we reflect Jesus' special love for the people on the margins. I think of Pope Francis, who passed into Jesus' presence this week. What a wonderful example of living out Jesus' example of love and service to the least of these, as he washed the feet of prisoners and migrants, opened a Vatican property as a shelter for homeless people, opened a free medical clinic for homeless and migrants, and advocated for prison reform. When we, as his people, live lives that reflect Jesus' upside-down priorities, we allow others to have glimpses of the King, who breathes his Spirit into us, just as he did his disciples. May we continue to have our eyes of faith opened to see him and grow in our love for him and his world. A note about the Song of Response. Our Song of Response today, sorry, I forgot to make that bigger, comes from words found written in a place in Germany where Jews were hiding from Nazis. They express the hope that Jesus' resurrection brings to us and to the world, a light shining in the darkness. The end of the song ends with an image of an American flag, and I don't want to tie national hopes to Jesus' hope of his kingdom, but this was the only version I could find that had lyrics, and I wanted the lyrics for everybody to understand. So, just a note. Y para ustedes que hablan español, voy a traducirlo mientras toca. I'll also translate so that people can understand the words.